Right, welcome to the March open call for JETZON. You are all very welcome. I'm glad you all can make it. Today we have two more fantastic talks. The first of those is Matthias Schaber, who's going to talk to us about surprising habits of tope sharks, which I have to admit I'm very much looking forward to. So Matthias, over to you.
So I guess you should see my title slide now, if all went well.
Yep, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. So hello, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to present an aspect of my work I'm currently conducting, and for your interest in some surprising habits of some tope sharks, which we recently found out and published. So I'm going to, so the title of my presentation today is From the Shallows to the Deep Sea. And as mentioned, I'll try to shed some light on some interesting behavior and previously unknown behavior of some of those sharks. To familiarize you with the background, tope is a medium-sized shark that is basically distributed with a circum-global distribution across, well, in most of all major oceans. They are a threatened species, though. Internationally, globally they're considered critically endangered by the IUCN. The northeastern Atlantic population is considered vulnerable. So there's altogether roughly not roughly, but precisely 5 different populations identified with genetic methods, but they don't show any links so far. So there's no indication of any exchange between those populations, and the populations are separate. And as mentioned, the Northeast Atlantic population of these sharks is considered vulnerable. In all of the populations that are distributed globally, above all, long years of intensive directed and undirected fisheries have led to the decline of the populations, rendering them basically critically endangered meanwhile. They're a pretty interesting species. So they have a highly complex spatial ecology, and they show, for example, an ontogenetic variation in habitat use, meaning that juveniles and smaller ones mostly reside in coastal areas and in often estuaries and in shallow waters, whereas the adults go a bit deeper and move a bit further away from the coasts. They show sex segregation, meaning that at certain times of the year, adult males are separated from the females, so they aggregate in different areas. They show partial migration, meaning that like a part of the adult animals undertake foraging migrations that are most likely, or that are related to reproduction. They show phylopatry and triennial reproduction cycle, so they basically return to the areas where they gave birth to the pups. And so basically it's a highly complex spatial ecology. They are highly migratory, but clear migration pathways in the North Atlantic, for example, have not yet been defined. So there's even though there's indications of some recurring migrations and some migration paths, there's no clear definition of such regular migration pathways. And also some critical, not really precisely defined as of yet. Critical habitat means popping grounds, nursery areas. There are some indications of such nursery areas and popping grounds in the Northeast Atlantic, namely along the Dutch Waddenzee coast and in some bays of the UK. But there's not a really definite finding of such habitats. What we know is in the German Bight, there's summer aggregations of adult tope near Germany's only, well, it's not a real offshore island, but it could be considered offshore by German standards. It's an island in the North Sea, and there's summer aggregations of big adult tope in this area. And we secured a project basically aiming at finding out what those sharks do when they are near the island, and where they go when they leave the island in autumn. So they show up in early summer and remain in the area, and then they obviously leave in autumn again when the water is cooling down. So the question is, what do they do there? So and especially, where do they go when they leave the island? And do they possibly also show, like phyllopatery, do they return to the island? We designed this project, and what we initially, or most of all, wanted to find out is if we are able to identify such critical habitats where they go when they leave the island, or also probably identify some regular migration pathways. All in having in mind that we are talking of a critically endangered species that is basically subjected to undirected fisheries across its range. So what we did is we tagged some adult tope at the time when this project, or this study which I'm presenting was conducted. By the time we tagged 16 adult tope with mini-pad satellite tags, 15 of those near Helgoland Island. You'll see it on the map shortly. And one was tagged by a colleague in Scotland, in the Scottish Bay, that is also assumed to be a habitat that's relevant for reproduction. We programmed the deployment duration of the tags for 270 days, or 180 days in the Scottish shark. And those tags, they collect, continuously collect data on depth, temperature, and light throughout the deployment duration. And then the tags detach from the shark surface and start transmitting the data. So that means by the time, from the time when I release the tagged animal until the tag hopefully detaches and surfaces and starts transmitting, I don't have an actual clue of what those sharks are doing. But as soon as the tags pop up, we have a deployment position, a detach position, and based on the depth, temperature, and light data we are collected, we can run some models that will produce migration paths with different degrees of certainty. So we modeled the most likely migration pathways, and initial results showed that. So what you see here is, I don't know if you see my mouse pointer, but Helgoland Island is in the inner part of the German Bight. So this is basically where we attacked and released the sharks. And they all, some of them remained in the area, but more or less sooner or later, all of them left the area where we tagged the sharks, especially in autumn. And with some diversions included, nevertheless, most of them, or all of them, went southwest and all entered the English Channel. And basically all of them remained in the Channel area for a certain time, for some weeks until months. So all of the sharks we tagged went into the British Channel and stayed there for a certain time. This finding, we're currently conducting analysis on possible habitat use there and what they're doing there. But this finding so far can already be considered, well, interesting, because tope are, as mentioned, caught. There's no limit on tope. So basically they're caught. There's no directed fisheries, but they're caught in a magnitude of fisheries. And the largest catches of tope from the Northeast Atlantic populations are made by France, and France catches the British Channel area. So basically in this area where all of the tags or all of the sharks that we tagged in the German Bight, all of them swam into an area where there obviously is an enhanced danger of being caught, actually. but that's just as a note. So you're all Twilight Zone enthusiasts, so bear with me. We come to another aspect right now. So not all of the sharks. So this is, well, all of the sharks went into the British Channel, but some of them really showed some pretty interesting behavior. And this is shown here. Altogether, 3 of the sharks that we tagged near Helgoland Island, and also the shark that was tagged in Luce Bay, Scotland, they went further. So those sharks are usually considered, well, not really coastal, but the main distribution of the shark species is on the continental shelf, even though offshore migrations are known. So what we see here and what we figured out is not the novelty about this, but still some of the sharks obviously went even further than the British Channel, and they crossed the European continental shelf, migrating into oceanic waters. And some of them, if I may say, pretty far. So there was one that more or less went directly to Madeira Island, where the tag detached. Another one, well, almost made it to the Mediterranean when the tag detached. And another one didn't swim as far south, but it remained in the Bay of Biscay and also regularly ventured into oceanic areas. This partial migration, or this partial far-ranging migration of adult tope have been described in other areas as well, in the Australian and New Zealand population, but also based on conventional tagging methods in the Northeast Atlantic. But the interesting thing is that we have here, from the tag recordings, we have depth data. And so what we see here is the depth distribution of the sharks. And what you can see is that they basically, as soon as they cross the shelf edge, so on the shelf, they basically used the whole water column, and there was no clear pattern of depth use. So they stayed near the seafloor, sometimes near the surface. There was no clear pattern. But as soon as they crossed the shelf edge, they almost immediately dove down to depths exceeding 600 meters. And so they basically went from the shallows to the deep sea. And not only did they enter really deep areas, they also seemed to, well, show a regular pattern of like depth use. And so we had a closer look at the time series from these depth measurements to delineate possible patterns. And what you see here is the depth use during the coastal phase and during the oceanic phase. So it's pretty evident that once they are, or when they're still on the continental shelf, there is no pattern in depth use. So during day and night, they inhabited the same depth ranges. But this immediately changed when they crossed into oceanic areas. And you can see this here. So during nighttime, they remained in the surface layers, whereas during daytime, they descended in mostly inhabited depths of like, well, far to 600 meters or even deeper. And we also did some wavelet analysis that clearly showed a change in the pattern, and that there was clearly, which you can see here. So from the moment on they crossed into the oceanic zones, there was a clear 24-hour pattern in depth use. Now, as mentioned, all of you are your Twilight enthusiasts, and you may well be aware of that this diurnal vertical migration from mesopelagic depths into the surface area is a common feature of the ubiquitous mesopelagic habitat communities that are distributed across the global oceans. And so we figured, well, that this may be related. So what we see here in the sharks may possibly be related to what all of those mesopelagic fishes we see in oceanic areas do, or not only fishes, organisms do on a daily basis. So we collected hydroacoustic data from some regions that were conducted at the same time when our sharks were swimming through the Northeast Atlantic. So we got some hydroacoustic data from the Dutch vessel Tridents that was conducting a blue whiting survey on this transect that is shown here. And we also got data from a Spanish vessel that was doing some hydroacoustic data in the west of Spain in the open Atlantic. And we analyzed this acoustic data. And what you see in this acoustic data, and I'm pretty sure you're aware of this, is you see these deep scattering layers that are formed by mesopelagic organisms, fishes, invertebrates, mollusks, a magnitude of fishes, a magnitude of organisms. And what we could clearly show through modeling the depth distribution of those sharks is that those sharks seem to follow the diurnal vertical migration of those organisms. What you see on these figures is sunset and sunrise. So basically, when the sun sets, rises, when the sun rises, the sharks end. Well, the mesopelagic organisms descend from surface layers into layers of like 500 meters depth. And as soon as the sun sets again, they ascend. And those sharks, in all of the areas where they entered oceanic habitats, they followed this migration. Now, one cool thing about hydroacoustic data is when you collect it at several frequencies, you are, to a certain extent, able to identify the organisms that that form the basis of the echo of the scattering. So you can't tell this is a certain fish or a certain squid, but you can, with a certain degree of, well, to a certain degree, you can identify the origin of the backscatter. And so this is what we did, and we overlaid the depth distribution of the sharks with the probabilities of encountering different species groups based on the acoustic data. And what we could see is that, oh, sorry, that was too fast. And what we could show is that the sharks clearly followed the diurnal vertical migrations of mostly fluid-like invertebrates. Fluid-like invertebrates, this is based on their backscattering properties, but the fluid-like invertebrates are mostly consistent of, let's say, mollusks, and in this case, squid. So when entering oceanic habitats, those sharks that are usually distributed in shallow areas, eating a variety of fish, immediately dive into those rich mesopelagic deep scattering layers and remain in layers and in parts of these layers, also during their diurnal vertical migration, where they have the highest probability of encountering squid. So concluding, what we found out is that unknown so far, adult tope, which are considered, as mentioned, often or like mostly continental, they make extensive use of mesopelagic habitats when they enter oceanic areas in the course of their far-ranging migrations. And they show clear diurnal vertical migration patterns, namely diving really deep into mesopelagic layers during daytime and following the vertical migrations of the organisms from those layers to surface layers at night. And we could show a clear association with those mesopelagic habitat features in a way that tope obviously follow the migrating deep scattering layers to increase their chances of encountering squid in oceanic areas, which are otherwise, at least in surface areas, considered comparatively poor in prey organisms. So when they swim from the nutrient-rich and food-rich coastal and continental areas into the comparatively prey-poor areas of open seas, they basically just dive down into this thick soup of prey in several hundred meters of depth and remain in this soup throughout the remainder of their migration. So what we found in this study is basically so far hitherto mostly disregarded a vertical and horizontal link of oceanic and coastal and shelf ecosystems. So we're not saying that tope play a key role in linking those habitats, but at least we were able to show that these sharks obviously have a much broader ecological range than we assumed so far. And one may probably might want to reconsider regarding these sharks as merely coastal and shelf associated. And obviously, although this behavior was only observed in a small sample of the tag tope, it was only 4 out of 16. These seem to be pretty common traits because obviously, as soon as individual tope crossed the shelf edge into the oceanic areas, they immediately took over this mesopelagic habitat use. And as mentioned, we have recently published a study. You can see the title here, and you'll find the link in the internet. And well, I hope you learned something interesting on tope now. So as mentioned, I'm usually I'm working with mesopelagic organisms, and I'm working with tope sharks. But when we started this project, I wouldn't have expected that I somehow would be able to combine both aspects in a pretty surprising way. And that's it from my side. So thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions regarding the sharks or what we did and so on, please feel free. Thank you very much for listening.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Matthias. I see we've already got a couple of things in the chat, so let me go to that. First of all, Heather, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Sure, Matthias, that was a great talk. I'm just curious if there's any available gut content information for these shark, or do you plan to do any to ground truth the acoustics, or any fecal analyses? Yeah.
There is gut content analysis available for these species, but well, not for. Well, let's say it is known that they feed mostly mackerel and fishes when they're on the shelf, but is for example around the Azores, where they also occur and are targeted by bottom long lines. Gut content analysis has shown that they mostly feed on snipe fishes and boarfish, for example. And there's also some gut content available from New Zealand and Australia, where they have been shown to well, at least seasonally prey on squid. Awesome. So as you have seen, they also follow layers, but they also stay in layers where there is a high probability of encountering like myctophids or the regular mesopelagic fishes. So we don't rule out that they also prey on those, but so far mesopelagic fishes have not been shown to constitute the diet of tope, which probably is because they are digested faster. I don't know, but they haven't been shown to constitute an important part, whereas squid have. So we assume, based also on their following of those specific squid layers, that they target squid, but we couldn't show it and prove it with gut content analysis.
Cool, thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Heather. Christian, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, thank you for your great talk. It was surprising, actually, to know that some sharks go to the mesopelagic. And maybe it's related to the next talk, but do you know about the vision of this shark? And this is the optical system of the shark could be adapted to bioluminescence?
This is a pretty cool question. I don't know. I have to admit, I do not know at all. But that's a pretty interesting question, because I mean, when they stay in these great depths, it can be assumed that there's not much light left to see. So I don't know if they're adapted to see bioluminescence when targeting squid. I don't know. But just one small reminder to the first part of your question. There's this behavior, of diving into great depths to feed on mesopelagic features has been shown for a range of sharks, but mostly for oceanic sharks. And many of those haven't been shown to undertake really regular diurnal vertical migration, but they just use, for example, eddies or other features to go deeper and dive into those layers to feed. But this would be the first time when basically a presumably coastal shark went that deep. But then, to answer your question, I don't know. I don't know about the vision and the adaptation to possible bioluminescence.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
So does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to type into the chat or just raise your hand. So I've got one, and you know, I guess I'm just curious. I mean, it seems to, you know, you've got 4 out of 16 of the sharks doing it.
Yeah.
And so from what you've said, there's no clear pattern by age or sex of the sharks in terms of it. So that suggests it's some sort of adaptive behavior. So with that in mind, why are they, you know, if they are going for squid, why are they going for squid? You know, are they particularly nutritious in some sense? I mean, you know, I like calamaris myself, but, you know, I just wonder from the point of view of the shark, you know, what it is that might be attracting them to them.
Yeah. Also a good question. I don't know. It's just like, as mentioned, based on what we know so far on stomach contents, squid have been shown to constitute, at least seasonally, an important part of the diet of tope across their global distribution. And why would this be the case? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm just curious, you know, whether they're, you know, I know nothing about squid, whether they're particularly high in lipids or something else that is sort of useful.
I don't know. No, because well, I think you'd assume that that many of those mesopelagic fishes have also they are also known for pretty high oil content. So not sure. Right? Yeah.
It's interesting, very interesting. So thank you once again, Matthias. Absolutely fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all to Christian